Okay, folks, it's my great pleasure to welcome you here for this, the first of the 2025 Fast Forward lectures. Welcome, fantastic to have you all here. Just starting off with a little bit of housekeeping. Bathrooms, if you need the bathrooms, they're immediately across the corridor there. In the unlikely event of an emergency, we're going to head out onto Simon Street. First thing to say is a huge thank you to Jib. This is the 17th consecutive year that Jib have supported this Fast Forward lecture series. It's really completely fantastic to have their support. We do all kinds of ambitious things that we simply could not consider doing without the support that they give us. So I'm going to show you a video. So thank you to Jib. So introducing Pete Bossley, not in need of any kind of elaborate introduction, I think, to an audience like this. Winner of the NZA Gold Medal 2012, and one of the great ones of New Zealand architecture. I said to a group of my students this morning, and I think the same thing would be true of this audience here, is that we've all spent time in Pete Bossley design spaces, whether that's Te Papa or the Maritime Museum or the hotel down on the waterfront. Pete's vision has impacted all of our lives. And as someone in the academic world, or I think it's probably true of all of us in the profession, Pete is one of the great contributors to the profession, that the profession in New Zealand has benefited from his wisdom, whether it was in writing or teaching or publishing his work or in leadership or in advocacy for architecture. Pete's going to talk, very quick introduction, Pete's going to talk tonight giving a lecture called Architecture, Sketching, Painting, The Hunt for a Great Idea. So without further ado, Pete Bossley.
Thank you, everybody, and thanks for coming. And the first thing I'd like to do is actually say something briefly about Andrew, because these things take a huge amount of organising, as you can or maybe can't imagine, but there's a lot of background work, so I'd really like to say thanks very much to Andrew Barry for organising this. And thank you very much for coming. For those of you who don't know who I am or what I've been up to, I've put together just a few images of the sort of range of work that we've been involved in and the sort of things that I like to keep myself doing. There's quite a range of works. We've always liked to do as wide a range of buildings as we can, from small ones to big ones when you can get them. And it keeps us extremely interested in doing what I think is one of the best ways that one can spend one's life. And what's been underpinning my approach to architecture and also painting and drawing is that the good ones are driven by quite a strong idea. And that has led to this talk tonight. And it's quite easy to say, the hunt for a good idea, where do the ideas come from? How do you find the idea? What do you do to come across one? And what do you do should you actually find one? Which is often, doesn't happen that often that you get a good one. So what are the links that have kind of linked architecture, looking back at it over the 40 odd years I've been doing it, and also looking back at paintings and drawings and thinking about how they work together. I use a variety of exploration to find these ideas that we might work with. And so the point is that the idea that you do find has to be strong enough to actually last through the process. And whether painting, it's your process. So we need to paint with something which is able to become something which has a authority of its own. You know, it has a personality, it has a reason to be. And somehow or other you have to get to something which says to you, yes, I have a reason to be, this is me. With a piece of architecture, you've got to have an idea that's strong enough that feels like you're fighting off every man and his dog, all of whom want to destroy your idea. And so often they do, because they're quite good at their jobs too. So their job is to beat the shit out of you. And they often manage to do it, especially council people. No, I didn't say that. We're not filming this, are we? For me, one of the quickest and easiest ways to chase ideas has been sketching. And I'm a bit of a obsessive sketcher. I had an exhibition at Object Space, and those of you who don't know Object Space, while we're on a bit of a push for Andrew and Object Space, fantastic gallery in Ponsonby, and they do really interesting things, but they had a little exhibition of 200 of my sketchbooks a couple of years ago, and they're really worth keeping an eye on. But now, of course, sketchbooks have been taken over or added to by tablets and phones. I did a lot of drawing on this thing, and it's so brilliant because you can sit in an airport waiting for a plane or a train or on a bus or in the passenger seat of a car and just draw all the time on one of these. So it's absolutely lovely way of passing your time. I'm also a kind of committed diagrammer. I don't know if it's a clinical expression or if it's a medical condition, people who don't understand things if it hasn't been drawn for them. But I sort of think that if I can't draw it, then it's either I won't remember it, I can't understand it, or it's not worth understanding. And my accountant used to laugh because he'd be sitting explaining double entry bookkeeping or something to me, and I'd be trying to do diagrams of it, and then I'd show him, is this what you mean? He said, yeah, that's about it. And then it was always good. And there's a couple of examples here. The top one is actually, we had a bad slip at our batch during Gabrielle, and we needed 6 or 7 people to dig out 8 truckloads of soil by hand. And so that top diagram is what happened from the day before with my brother-in-law and I driving to pick up a truck, and then driving the truck to pick up conveyor belts, and then going to the batch, and then meeting people, and blah, 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 blah. And it went right through till the next day, and when we managed to get rid of 8 truckloads and lie down exhausted with a beer by about 5 o'clock at night. Or whether it's a diagram to explain the office structure, or the 2 bottom right ones are diagrams by Kate Rowett, who's an economist who gave what was probably one of the best lectures I've ever been to in my life. And she gave it at an absolutely packed AOTS centre, and her opening line was how many economists are in the room, and about quarter of the people put their hands up, and the rest said, how many people in the room never ever thought they'd go to a lecture by an economist? And we all put our hands up and said, that's me, that's me. And, but she was brilliant, and she's got this donut theory, and the principle is that if you measure everything that economists measure the health of the economy or the planet by, and if it sinks inside the inner circle, it's bad for humans. If it goes outside the outer circle, it's bad for the planet. And it is such a brilliant, clear diagram that I'll never, ever forget it. And none of you will forget that diagram from now on, because it's just so clear, I reckon, that it's a cracker. And if you want to see her lecture, you can actually see it on YouTube. It's the one that we saw is pretty well what is available on YouTube, so I really recommend it. When I was at university, I rather precociously attempted to diagram the belief systems of most of the Western world, which I thought couldn't be difficult. So I spent 6 months reading mythology from Sumeria through to the 20th century and tried to diagram the relationship between their view of the afterlife and their major buildings, like the Sumerian and the Egyptian pyramids, and Greece and Christianity's cathedrals, etc. So I had a lovely 6 or 9 months reading mythology and doing these diagrams, which was a delicious kind of way to finish my years at architecture school. And recently I came across these Feynman diagrams, and these, some of you may know about these, but these are just so exciting, I reckon. This is a guy in 1948 developed these diagrams, which they are mathematical expressions of the behavior of the smallest things on the planet. So they're looking at photons and electrons and positrons and things, quarks. And this little diagram shows what happens when these things interact. And it's a funny little two-dimensional thing with 5 lines, 4 lines and a squiggly bit. And it explains this phenomenally complex 3-dimensional thing. And apparently it totally transformed quantum physics, because up to then they were all dealing with huge arcane formulae. And suddenly these diagrams came along, and it just blew them all away and said, God, that's it. And they've used them ever since. And the interesting thing is that there are millions of these interactions between quarks and photons going on all the time, but everyone is totally different. So everyone has to have its own little diagram. But they do it, they just draw them. And I just think, this is extraordinary that you can explain something so complex that in 4 or 5 lines. I think it's fantastic. I was going to read out that stuff to you, but I thought if I did, I'd sound like Victor Borge with his punctuation thing, And I've read that a few times. I have no idea what it means. But the hunt for a good idea for me is embodied in from an architectural point of view, is embodied in the attempt to lift the spirits of people. That's what architecture is about for me. And that's absolutely what it's to do, is to lift the spirits of the people who use the building, who look at it, who pass by it, who see it in photographs. If you don't do that, then you're not actually succeeding architecturally. And in terms of paintings, it might be like this. Because the international average for people to look at a painting in an art gallery is 8 seconds. So I thought, well, if I can get up to 9, I'd be doing quite well. So what do I need to get that extra second? It might be that you need a good idea. And so where do they come from? Do they come from precedent, or do they come from intuition? A wonderful David Mitchell, who many of you know, I think was famous for saying, and I think it was his quote, I don't know, but a good idea might come from the gumboot on the sole of his shoe when he's walked down K Road. And I tend to believe that that's possibly the case if we give it the chance. Precedent, do we do buildings which pick up on buildings from the past? In this case, the top one is a group building. A building from the group, and then a more recent one of ours, which sort of reflects back to that, or the batch, which is a kind of New Zealand archetype, and how can we pick up on some of those archetypes and continue to develop them, or from intuition, from drawings which are done in sketchbooks. These ones were sitting in a cafe in Barcelona somewhere, which were not at all intended to have any reason to be except just for themselves. And they may or may not relate to a piece of architecture or to a painting in the future, who knows, but they're there, and it's wonderful to have them in a pile of sketchbooks you can go and leaf back and pick up on ideas. Or are they slightly more deliberate drawings, which are kind of unscripted explorations of things which unfortunately are not briefed buildings? They're just me scribbling and saying, gee, I'd love to do a high-rise, but exploring what they might be. And I call these things, we do drawings and paintings. On tablets, there's something different, it seems to me. So if they're just drawings on a tablet with no form, I just call them tings. And then if they've got a bit of architecture about them, I call them archi-tings. So I've got files of tings and archi-tings and paintings and drawings and stuff. they just go on endlessly. And some of these are related to projects that we're working on, and some of them are just drawings for their own sake. But I draw quite quickly because I have this fear that the idea is going to leap across the horizon in front of me and I'm going to miss it. So if I don't draw it quickly, I won't capture it. And I often find that's the case, you know. It's like waking up in the morning and you've had this brilliant idea in the middle of the night. You wake up, you draw it, and then you look at it in the morning and you say, well, what a load of crap that was. But often, the same when you're driving in a car, you can't actually draw it immediately, so you have to think of something, and then by the time you stopped and got ready, sometimes it's too late. So it's nice to work quite fast and capture these things and let them then figure out later on what they're all about. This was a competition entry way back when for the Botanic Gardens in the south of Auckland, and they wanted a front gate. So I'm not sure where this idea came from, and there's a bit of a connection because obviously they have forks. But the idea was that the fork would go down at night, and then it would go up in the morning, and the buses could drive underneath it. And for some strange reason, I didn't win the competition. Why do you laugh? The judges said they liked it, but they didn't think they could fit it within their $10,000 budget. But one of the big things that's driven architecture in my life, and I think it's partly because of the education I got in this place, and with great teachers like Mike Austin over there, but Dick Toy and John Dixon and David Mitchell and people. Narrative is something that we can build into architecture, but buildings are pretty dumb, really. You can't say much with a building, and I do think that we tend to try and say too much with the buildings, and we ask students to say too much with buildings. If you want to say a lot, if you want to tell a detailed story, write a book or make a movie, don't try and fit too much into a building. But narrative is a fantastic thing for generating ideas that we can use to develop the buildings from and to sustain the idea of the building right through to the bitter end. And one of the big narratives for me, and I think for most New Zealand architects, is landform. Because New Zealand landform is so significant, you just can't avoid it. And I think all architects have to take a stand about their position in relation to the land. And we know that New Zealand's not clean and green. We know that was the biggest piece of advertising deception that was pulled over the eyes of the world, and it hasn't been clean and green for a hell of a long time. But I do think that we've got to accept that it's not natural, and I think that at the core of the Resource Management Act is a real issue that believes the land is natural and that we shouldn't be here and that we are guilty, should be guilty about being here. And so we have to do everything we can to mitigate our presence, rather than accepting that the country is fully designed. Every square inch of it has been designed since Māori arrived and started burning off the land and have been redesigning the land. We have designed just about every inch of it, and so we should accept that, we should take it on board, and we should just do it a hell of a lot better as a result. And so the surface of the land is something that I've been really interested in, and all sorts of ideas have come along about that. This is a thing called, a couple of projects we did based on the idea of a peeled field, where the idea was that you just sort of peeled the land back and put your building in and flop the earth back on top again. And this one was a visitor centre out east Auckland. Unfortunately, they halved the budget halfway through, so we ended up doing something quite different. And this one, the top left one, is an encampment of buildings, and I needed the road. It's a small farm, and the road comes down here and goes through to the site next door. So we needed to build a peninsula to sort of wrap these 3 sleep outs around this outdoor space. And so to do that, I just pulled the earth down over the roof and created a little peninsula. And so that the surface of the land sort of was used to actually create a ridge which enveloped the outdoor space. And more recently, we've been doing more of this, which is trying to sort of continue the land onto the roof of the buildings and just play with what's sort of confused a little bit the edge of what's a building and what's the land. And then, of course, there's the lurking landform. This lovely quote from Will Durant: "Civilization exists by geological consent, subject to change without notice." And I think that's a pretty powerful comment. And in New Zealand, it's very much the case, and I've always sort of thought that if the deep ones don't get you, then the shallow ones will. And very unfortunately, of course, we discovered in Christchurch that was certainly the case. But the peril of the land that we live with, it's been going on for a long time. When Taupo went up, it was recorded in Greek history and Chinese history because the skies darkened as a result of this huge column that went up kilometres and kilometres into the air. And so we've been living around these forces for centuries. How do we cope? And I've always thought it's interesting that it's like the expression of a kind of teenage years of our culture, I suppose, that we take our supposedly most important people and our biggest collection of taonga and we shove them on the biggest fault line we can find in Wellington. And then we take our other biggest collection of people and we sit them on top of 50 volcanoes in Auckland. There's something weird going on. And so we sort of live with this peril, and last year, a lot more than ever, we were made very aware that all these roads we drive on a lot, actually the nice solid roads we think we're on, they're actually little thin slithers of asphalt sitting on top of some shonky ground. And roads all over the country are in dire need of repair. So we've done a few buildings which we called faulted buildings, which have been split by a fault line, so that the plan is split horizontally and vertically, and the line that runs through the building creates difficulties. You have to manoeuvre it. You're aware of the shift or the change. One was a house at St Heliers, the top one. The bottom one was Te Papa, where the big black 4 metre thick wall runs right through the building and slices it, creates a few problems along the way. And in the case of Te Papa, we were lucky enough to get to also design the Treaty of Waitangi exhibit in the centre of the space. And the thing about Te Papa is that this was a competition that was absolutely awash with narrative. They demanded narrative in every direction. And we tried to build what narrative we could think of into the orientation of the building. So we oriented the south end of the building with the streets of Wellington, which is the kind of traditional colonial settlement pattern of rolling out a grid over the landscape, no matter what the contours were doing. And that was probably done from some surveyor's office in London by somebody who'd never ever been to New Zealand and never would. Then we oriented the northern part, where the Māori galleries and the wharanui, or the marae, in a direction which people like Mike Austin had identified were quite common amongst marae, which is to face east of north, face towards the openness where people are coming from, often with a bank of trees or mountains behind to create a sense of enclosure behind. And so we did that, and then that created this wedge of space in the middle, which became the central space where the treaty ended up being exhibited. And the nice thing about that was that we were able to design the space so that over time it could change. And so as the relationship between Māori and Pākehā changed, the exhibition designers could use the space differently to either create a greater link across that space or create more division across the space and try maybe to reflect what's going on. And what came out of that was one of my favourite words, which is one of those contronyms, which is the word cleave, which is, it means itself and it means its opposite. So it means to come together, but it also means to separate. So if you cleave a bit of firewood with your axe, you're splitting it. but it also means to come back together. We did have to work quite hard not to talk about it as the Great Cleavage, which wouldn't have necessarily helped our cause, but and that's come on more recently to a series of paintings that I did after Gabrielle, which caused these huge sort of splits in places, poor places like Muriwai, where whole communities have been split open, the land's been split open, and the people are struggling. So the whole idea of the split, the cleave, cutting things apart, and now the community's rebuilding themselves and coming together. So it was nice to work with that in a more abstract sort of fashion. Land moving and heaving was also influential in this house, where I started on an empty site out at the altitude in the days before it was fully built. It's just been, the developers had taken all the topsoil off and left this clay that was sort of heaving like a skinned rabbit. And so these people wanted a arts and crafts house. And so I suggested they go and talk to Terry Hitchcock, who did beautiful arts and crafts houses. But they, for some reason, they didn't want to do that. So I gave them a house which was clad in the arts and crafts materials, like timber and plaster, and one of the walls has got the shingles that are normally on a roof, but I put them on the wall. Then gave them a building that felt as though it either hadn't quite settled in the right place or it had been dislodged from where it was supposed to be. So I remember driving out to see them on a rainy Wednesday night and thinking, they're going to think this is terrible. They're going to kick me out. They're not going to pay my fee. I haven't answered their brief. I haven't done anything right. But they loved it, so they went ahead and built it, which was amazing. It still amazes me. And I went there recently. Actually, it's still there. They've sold it, and it's almost unchanged. So I was quite surprised. And then thinking with paintings in this case more about the climate and about the land, what the land's doing for us and what we're doing to the land. And so this is a series of paintings called 2 Degrees, No Way Out, thinking about the impact of the lurking peril of the environment changing as much as it is, and what the impact that it's going to have on human endeavour. And so there's a whole series of paintings based on that idea. Another nice idea that's sort of sustained our practice for a long time has been encampments. And I have often thought about the development of the walled garden or courtyard housing. And the Persian word for walled garden is paradise. And we live in, God's own paradise. And so I thought there was a nice way of picking up on that idea and then developing it to reflect somehow the Kiwi tradition, which is different from the more traditional European or Western architecture or even Eastern architecture traditions. And so I've done a series of houses which have been broken into small elements. Most of them are holiday places. And so there's a sense of encampment. You're not living in the city, you're living in the countryside. You don't have to link the buildings. You can walk from one to the other. You can get the grass between your toes. You can feel what it's like to be outside. It's almost like camping, but it's, not camping in anybody's version of camping when you see these houses. But and then you use the contours of wherever you are to actually help reinforce the walls that would otherwise might be solid walls creating a walled garden. And the notion that we don't need to keep an aggressive, chaotic exterior environment out. We're much more comfortable with the world outside, and it's a pretty benign country, let's face it. So we can invite the land and the contour in and the wind to come through, but let's let the contours suggest that sense of environment. And I think marae around the country often do this really nicely already, the way that they are built up of a series of buildings which all relate to each other in a pretty nice way. And so these are some of the buildings that we've done, which are broken into small elements and then relate to each other in all sorts of different ways, depending on the contours, the orientation, the wind, the sort of the quality, the atmosphere, the spirit of the place where they are. This one's on an island in the Bay of Islands, and it was one of the first of the bigger ones that I did. And it has 3 buildings focused around a central garden area here. And that outdoor space and the terrace, which is just there, become the heart of the house, and the buildings all sort of focus on that. And the nice thing about, you can't quite, you can sort of see it, yeah. I mean, when you do this, when you spread buildings out rather than put a lump in the middle of the site, you spread them out, and you've got a relationship going immediately. The relationship between this house and that guest house over there, and you're aware of each other, but you're not in each other's pockets, and you can shout to each other across the lawn. Kids can play on the lawn, etc. And so you get a lovely sense of relationships between the buildings. And this one, which I saw the photo of before, is also on a beach here. And this is just a sort of example of the drawing process that goes on, dozens and dozens and dozens of drawings before you get to one which is closer to where you need to be or want to go. One nice thing about this group of drawings is that one of these, but in this process, one of my contributions to architecture, I think, is a new form of drawing where you sit in a helicopter and you just hold your pen steady and your pad jumps around in the chopper, and you get some pretty nice lines out of it. It's really good. But as you can see, it's a cluster of buildings, which are 1, 2, 3 sleep outs here, and the main house over here with a big terrace, this big terrace here, which they all focus on, and this space becomes the heart of the house all summer and most of the winter, actually. And the other thing about it is it's a holiday place, so you don't give it a front door. You know, people have driven a long way to get here, so you just drive across the lawn, unload your stuff, and you're met by a outdoor living space with a fire and a big table and a barbecue. So the whole generosity of living there and enjoying each other's company is welcoming. As soon as you arrive, you don't have to knock on a door and wait for somebody to open it and fear that you're a Seventh-day Adventist or something. This one's in Hawaii, so it's in a more suburban situation. There are houses either side of it. And, but once again, we break the house down into 1, 2, 3, 4, oh no, sorry, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 elements. There's no front door as such, but there is a wall that you pass into from the street. But once you're inside that wall, you just meander through here. There's no front door. And you have the wind floating through and lots of breezeways and things to cool the place down. And the other thing we did here was that all the other houses down here have their pools out in the obvious place by the sea, but the trade winds come through at 4:30 every afternoon and make those pools uninhabitable. So we suggested putting it back in here and creating a microclimate. So these people find themselves very popular about 4:35 every day when people are looking for somewhere to swim. They don't swim in the sea because there's a few sharks that go up and down there as well. But, and so here you can see the wall to the street, but once you're through that gateway, it's all pretty open and you come into this shared courtyard. And the other thing about this house is that it took us about a year to convince the council that we could do a naturally ventilated house rather than fully air conditioned. Because as you might know, in Hawaii, the kind of broken hip roof thing is their so-called traditional roof form. It was actually introduced in 1940 or something, but they just have a flat ceiling and they pack it full of air conditioning stuff. And we said, we're not doing that, we're doing a naturally ventilated place. And so all the roofs are designed to keep as much as possible the sun off the windows and the glazing. And we had to admit that there were a couple of months in the summer, which the bedrooms needed cooling because it's pretty difficult to sleep in those conditions. So, but in the main, it's not conditioned. And the council finally believed us and the clients say it works really well. Lots of big outdoor spaces to sit and enjoy the sea, which is why they're there in the first place. This one in the Bay of Islands was quite a tight little bay, actually, and the clients wanted a space for the kids to play cricket and throw kickballs around and stuff. And so we did this little encampment of 3 spaces. And then we had the idea that the roof might be like 3 leaves that had just sort of settled quietly onto the land. And they are, the 3 roofs are held up by their own structure of very slender steel posts. And then the walls of the rooms underneath just do their own thing. They don't follow the folds of the roof at all. And so there's an independence between those 2 going on. And you get the folds sort of following or reflecting the topography in the background. This is a subdivision that we've been lucky enough to be working on for about 19 years now. When we took it over, it was absolutely barren land. It should never have been a farm in the first place. It had about this much topsoil, and it's had 1.5 to 2 million trees planted on it. And even this photograph was probably 5 or 6 years ago. And the bush now is just rampant. Kiwis everywhere, all sorts. It's really fantastic. And the idea, the thing about the strong idea is, we had this idea of the folded plain roof and how it could be so beautiful. And one thing I said about that was, well, what we mustn't do is interrupt it with lights. There's going to be no downlights in this roof because it's going to lose its integrity. And it sounded like a good thing to do. It turned out to be incredibly difficult because we had to uplight everything, and it worked out really nice, but it was very difficult. And then more recently, one we've done on Waiheke, which is for a couple and a friend to live in. And it's broken into a series of rooms, series of spaces. There's a house here, a bedroom, garage. They have a yoga studio and dance studio that there they run classes from, and then some woofers come and stay here, and then their friend lives in this one. So once again, it's creating an encampment with a nice space in there. And it was all an interesting exercise in prefabrication and sustainability. It's all LVL flooring, LVL roofing, and 2 different forms of prefabbed walls, which we experimented with. Neither of which were very successful, unfortunately, but that's a different story. And I'm lucky enough to have a studio for painting and experimenting with some of these ideas. So it enables me to work on paintings and drawings, and sometimes even architecture comes into the space. But this is a recent series of paintings which started off being thinking about the fact that we live in a village. We're a global village, we're so much in touch with everybody. When I went travelling overseas, hitchhiking for a year, the only way I could communicate with anybody was with an aerogram, which most of you don't know what it is, but it's a funny old sort of letter that you folded up, and people would send me one, and if they were lucky, or if I was lucky, it would come to a post office that I was happened to be at somewhere in Turkey or something, And now kids go away, or we all go away, and we're in constant contact with each other all the time. It's so boring. You can't get away from your parents, no matter what you try to do. But they developed into the idea, well, we live in a village, but it's an endless village that continues around the globe. And that led on to me thinking more about colonisation, in the sense that these villages are sending out all this information. And I started thinking, well, that's actually what we've always done. Northern Egypt colonised southern Egypt. Rome colonised the whole known world. The Ottomans did it. Everybody's done it. And England obviously did it. We're now thinking about colonising Mars, or one idiot is. And we're allowing ourselves to be colonised internally with these things, We're constantly being bombarded with stuff by people we don't know. We don't know what they think, but we're letting them right into us. And so we're being colonised by total strangers. And in the old days, you knew at least that it was those bastard Englishmen who were colonising it. Now you don't even know who it is. Collaboration is something that often is thought of as a bit of a dirty word in architecture, but I think it's really important because you can get great stuff comes out of it. This was a house that came about for a collaboration with a New Zealand cinematographer who was living in London. He's one of the top cinematographers in the world. He's done Harry Potter's, he did Midnight Ashes, he did also Angela's Ashes, Midnight Express. And he's got a wonderful eye, and he and I sort of fought our way through this project because he's quite opinionated, and we had a good fun time doing this house in the Marlborough Sounds. But there were, because he was overseas, or he's filming in America and London, all over the place, there was a lot of, this is in the days of faxes, those of you who have heard about what a fax is. So there were drawings going back and forth, and he would ring me and talk, and lots of drawings, more than if he had been in the country, I think. But the house went through 2 serious iterations, or a lot of iterations, but the big change was between these two, the top one being one of the early versions and the bottom one being what we ended up with. And it was much more glassy and pavilion-like to start with, and it became much more sort of enclosed and comfortable in the long run. And one of the stories within the story of this house was that when I first met him down there, we were staying in the old batch, and he was sitting up all night on his bed, on his phone to his office in London, which he liked, you know, that's the way he liked to work. But he was coming and going from New Zealand to there. He also started a winery down in Marlborough Sounds, so he had a big connection there. But he had a huge amount of work to be done all over there, so he was back and forth all the time. And the bedroom became the sort of centre of his international life, as it were. So I gave him this bedroom, which is looks sort of peripatetic. It's on wobbly legs that look as though it's moving. He's about to leave, or he's just arrived, not quite settled. And the other nice story about this, I suppose, well, it's not that nice, but I don't even know if I should tell it. But he's getting on with his age, but every time we met him, he seemed to have a younger and younger girlfriend on his arm. And so in the drawings, I called this bedroom an eyrie because it's up on top of a cliff, and just to the left of that photograph is a couple of beautiful trees, so it's quite up high in the trees. And one night I got a phone call from Middle America somewhere, and he said, "Do you know that an eyrie is a nest of a bird of prey?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "You fucker." But it's, because of his input, the house is lovely, had so much more eclectic than if I had designed it on my own. And he had a fantastic collection of furniture, antiques, wonderful Eileen Gray stuff, Middle American, or mid-century furniture. And the day he moved in, it felt like he'd been in there for 20 years. It was just fantastic. And the other nice thing about the house is that it's an early foray into sustainability and low carbon footprint, etc. The plywood, there's no plywood, all the plywood had to be sourced with organic glue lines, a lot of recycled timber, recycled iron bark out of the bridges in Otago, etc., etc. So the house has a really, really lovely kind of sense of comfort and it's lived in, feels lived in, and a lovely connection with the ocean. Natural light is another thing which has been a really strong driver for me, and I really enjoy the value of natural light to animate our world, and once you start looking at it, you just can't not see it. It's just so beautiful, everything you look at, whatever it is. The light does fantastic things for us, and we can spend a lot of time, drawing it, painting it, thinking about how it animates our architecture. It's incredibly central. It does central things for us. And Leonard Cohen on point as always. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Sometimes done on a tablet. This one is somewhere in Italy, I think. I'm thinking about light, two different sources of light in that case. Or the reflections, once again, on that roof and the folded plane, the beautiful variety you get with reflections. And when you look at it like this, it's one thing, but imagine that it's actually moving all the time. That as the sun moves and the clouds come around, it's just constantly changing, and it is so beautiful to have that articulation and animation. And this is a hyperbolic paraboloid roof that we put on on a house, which twists so that it, over our right-hand shoulder up here, the morning sun comes in, the afternoon sun comes in from the left, and at night there are a ring of uplights that shine up on the underside there and give you beautiful, the whole thing just hovers up there, and you don't actually need any other lights. It's that one hovering form and surface gives you all you need for most of the day, most of the evening. Whereas in one of the sleep outs, the one that was buried in the that I described before, where the hill comes down over the top of it, it's got this shaft which lets light straight from the top, and you get this fantastic clarity of this thing moving across. As the sun moves, this comes down the wall and moves across the floor, and it's quite a lovely thing to live with. And there's the simplicity of the hyperbolic paraboloid floating across the main space. Other ways, once you start thinking about how you can use light, thick walls that let it in differently in different times of the day, sculpted shapes that all pick up light quite differently and give you a huge amount of richness to the forms, the drama that changes as you move along. This may work. Hey, look at that. So this is a reflected pool on the outside of the building. And then that reflection comes into the inside of the building. And so once light is giving us a huge amount of richness without doing much, once you kind of let it in, it'll do the work for you. This is a small encampment that Mira and I know very well. It's our little batch, but it was an original batch, the yellow one, and we put the red one next to it. So it's a little encampment. But it's the red box, when we put it there, it's under a putakawa, and so this is the first time we invented something that we like to call light stalks. So they reach up and they try and suck the light into the space. And they have light glass, not just on the top like a skylight, but they have glass down one side, so they are oriented, and we orient them to get the morning sun or the afternoon sun, depending on the conditions. And they're just lovely for animating the space inside the building, and they give it a lovely sculptural kind of quality as well. This is a scheme we did that in a forest that didn't go ahead, but I might have been getting a little bit overboard with the light stalks on this one, because there's about 30 of them. But this is one that was built that Finn Scott designed, a beautiful, beautiful house down near Lake Taupo. And there we managed to bring the hillside down. Oh, another one on the same slide as me. There you go. We managed to bring the hillside down and onto the roof of the house. So there's a public walking track up here, goes up behind the house. And so the grass roof is a kind of continuation of that. And, from above, that's what people look at as they're walking up the hill. And this family of light stalks brings different shaped light down into different rooms down below it. And then at night, they also add a quality of mystery to the space. And in the kind of lovely coziness of the living room below, it gets pretty cold down here. It's cold and wet. So there's a lovely big fires and a cozy collection of rooms. But they have these asymmetrically shaped light stalks bringing light in and lifts the roof. And once again, with the sculptural shape of the rooms and the natural light, you don't actually need paintings or anything else to bring the light to bring it to life. I've always loved the way that light dives into the sea and then gets refracted and changed and bounced out again, and you get these layers and layers of water and light and shifting, moving patterns, etc. And we were lucky enough to be asked to do the Sir Peter Blake extension to the Maritime Museum. And so how do we try and recreate that sense of the wateriness of the environment that the boats actually want to be in? The boats don't want to be in a museum, they want to be out on the ocean. And so we came across Dampelon and these lovely colours that you can get it in. And it's really nice the way that sometimes it's crisp and clear in the bright light, and then in the misty night it almost disappears from view. So it's got this fantastic quality. It's rather like the surface of the sea. And the building is designed because it has NZL-32, the first boat to win the America's Cup for New Zealand, in there. And that is, because it was gifted to Te Papa, then it has to be treated like a taonga. So it's got to have controlled light atmospheric conditions, not too much light. So it's in the centre of the building, the old shed, as it were, which is here. And then there were a whole lot of small boats which we put outside in the extension of the new, and we created a walkway, a ramp that goes around and up and takes you back up and around and in and out to the top where the replica America's Cup is. And I was presenting this to a fundraising thing long before it was built, and talked about this light and dark. And a crusty old chap stood up at the end and he said, you know, I really like that because that's what we do when we're sailing the oceans. You know, it's just day and night and day and night and day and night, and it's fantastic sort of rhythm of lightness and dark. And so I did that little drawing to kind of reflect the top one. Oh, can you see that? Lost my light. Oh, there it is. Did that little drawing to sort of reflect that. And so the building picked up on that more, and so there's NZL-32 inside the space. And then I was kind of inspired by these lovely optimists on the beach at St Heliers and places where the kids and the boats and the sails are all flapping and raring to go. So we put these smaller boats out in this lighter space next to the edge of the building to sort of get the sense of that, and the sense of that business of them being wanting to be out and on the ocean. And then with the ramp, we tilted the whole plane of Dampelon to follow the ramp and kind of give you a glimpse underneath of what's happening inside. You know, in the old days, one might have said it was like just lifting a skirt slightly and exposing an ankle, but probably not allowed to say that anymore. New Zealand architects are fantastic at context. We all do that really well, I reckon, and we all tend to think about context. So maybe too much. It's arguable that we might let good ideas be buried because they're subsumed by concerns about context. But we do tend to do it. This was a John Scott house, one of his last houses in Havelock North here, and it had one of his big porches on it, which he had red. We were asked, he painted in red. And we were asked to do a little sleep out just next to it, so that the two of them worked together as an accommodation unit. So if you don't know about it, there's a place called John's Place in Havelock North. You can go and stay in a John Scott house. Whoop, that one. But if you're not quite as lucky, you can stay in a Pete Bossley house in this one here. But we gave it a big porch, which, for obvious reasons, we painted it yellow, and his is red. So that seemed like a nice little connection to work with. And once again, some context. This is a more recent house in Takapuna. The context is fantastic, as you can see. Not only the ocean, but you look the other direction, you've got this beastie. And this is really what the site is all about. And the volcanic rock and all the stories about New Zealand volcanic condition. And so the house is designed as a series of planes creating spaces that go, it's a long thin site, so it's designed to try and connect always with the ocean out here, as two-story, and the axes are picked up by the spaces and the walls, which are reinforcing those axes and on both levels. And once again, in a funny sort of way, it's a little encampment because you have to go outside to get from the living areas to the bedroom areas at the back, even though it's a city house. And here you can see, you know, the concrete fins, just even in the back half of the house, they reinforce that connection out towards the ocean. And here everything takes your eye towards Rangitoto, the direction of the boards, the walls either side. There's a big wall up above running through there, carrying that whole floor. Big walls on the left. Even the bathroom gets focused, you know, pretty heavily onto Rangitoto. There's a nice opportunity in this house. We wanted to soften the concrete and the forms a little bit. So we engaged a felt artist who happened to be Dutch. And she, unfortunately, because of COVID, couldn't come out here. So we sent her images and told her all about volcanic rock and the sea and the ocean and the light here and stuff. And she came up with this rather beautiful artwork, which is totally transforms the space when you put it across. And it's a double-sided artwork, so you see it from both sides, which is quite unusual for felt. And she still hasn't been out to see it, actually, which is a shame. So, but it's like 5 meters high and almost 5 meters square, so it's a really big work for her. And the other thing is sculpture. I love taking sculptural opportunities when we can, and pushing shapes and forms and letting the light act onto those forms. You know, why should a post be vertical? It's nice to make the engineers work a bit harder than they normally want to. But this is not only an angled post, it's also turns into a seat. So it's by the front door, so you can sit there and take your shoes off or wait for people. So it's a lovely multi-functioning kind of thing. And, you know, paintings that respond to the context as well. So we had a whole problem with red weed down at the Batch that wouldn't go away on the beaches, so I did some paintings that sort of picked up on that. And then the one on the right is a painting of a series called Lockdown Floating. So it's from that first lockdown when, I don't know about you, we loved it. It was great. It was sort of quiet and peaceful, and nobody knew what was going on, and the birds came out and the cars went away. And so it was a really nice kind of way of thinking about the floatiness of all of that. And I think the nice thing about narrative is when you start thinking about it in terms of drawings and even architecture, or drawings and paintings, there's so many stories to be told that it's a lifetime pursuit. And then, of course, the social context as well. So this is Te Awaho Newstroom. Sorry. Apologies to the Dutch people in the room. But that's a project in Foxton, which was the National Dutch Museum. It became a local iwi museum. It's a public library and a cafe, restaurant, etc. And it went through iterations, but one of the first ones came out of a whole series of public consultation we did. We did a couple of Saturday sessions with a whole lot of locals. And Foxton's a pretty small town. It's about 4,000 people, but they were really enthusiastic. And one of the things that came out of it was the whole history of flax. There used to be 25 flax factories in Foxton, and now there are none, but it was a really serious thing. And then all the stories about Kite and about the containers and the baskets of knowledge, etc. And there was a Mitre 10, which was between our site, actually, and the river. It wasn't on our site, but I thought, what if we got that? We ripped the walls away from it, left the roof, and then we just poked these buildings for the in and out around it and created a beautiful outdoor gathering space with these buildings tucked into it, the museum and the library and the iwi and the carving school, etc. And there's a windmill there, which is, you know, also attracted the Dutch to be there, I think. Sorry, what did I go to? But after about 3 or 4 years, people loved all of this, and then they decided that their budget was about half what they originally thought it was, so we had to go through a whole transformation. But by then they had actually bought the Mitre 10, so we had to fit everything into the Mitre 10 building, which is here, and the whole idea of the new stream came up and the new dawn as a combined idea for iwi and Dutch, and the connection between the main street and the river with an access running through here, so a sort of flow in this direction, but then a transverse meandering between the three elements of the building, almost without any obstruction, so that you got a lovely way of enjoying the otherness of the cultures that were there. And so we took this shed and we extruded a mezzanine right through it at the upper level, and then added a shared gallery because they couldn't afford to environmentally protect the whole shed. It was really low budget, this thing. It was like 9 million for the whole thing, including fit out, exhibition, everything. So this little gallery has the conditions that you can borrow a Rembrandt from Te Papa or something and put it in there, but the rest of it is lower grade. But putting the extruded upper level in meant that we had these two spaces either side for the Maori gallery, the Dutch gallery, workshops and meeting rooms, and then the library underneath linking the two. And it worked really well. This was 4 o'clock in the morning on opening day, and I think in the first weekend 10,000 people went through it, which is not bad for a town of 4,000. And here you can see the two sides of it, the sort of difference, wonderful exhibitions by Workshop E, the Dutch side, the library in the middle, and then the Maori side on this side. And there's a very easy flow between the two. And it was really nice to sort of work with people of such different backgrounds and different approaches, and letting them come together and appreciate their differences and their similarities. And social context also sort of impacted some of my paintings. So this was done after we came back. A group of us went to Brazil for 2 weeks on an architectural, high-speed architectural tour of Oscar Niemeyer and people. And I really loved the Brazilian people. They're fantastic. They're full of energy and excitement. But I was also despondent about their hatred of the government and paying taxes. And that came up a few times. And I remember saying to one guide that we had, well, you know, not all of us dislike paying taxes. And he said, yeah, but you pay taxes and you know it's going to go to roads or schools or hospitals. We pay taxes and it's going into some asshole's back pocket. And I suddenly realized that the weight of corruption. So this is a series of paintings called The Burden of Corruption, which I also realized you could transfer some of them slowly became the weight of violence in New Zealand. I was depressed about the kind of figures around domestic violence in this country. But one of these sold to, or a woman who bought one of these said, oh, I really like that story, she said, but it also reminds me of the sunset from my batch at Piha. And I thought, that's fine by me. That's great. We're getting there, folks. Are you all right? Can you keep going for another 5 minutes? This is a recent house we're working on in Taranaki for a wonderful couple who've got a dairy farm, and they're doing everything sustainable that you can imagine with this farm. But two really important things about the site was this view of the mountain, and there's a lovely block of bush right behind their site, which is unplanned as a pure rectangle, a square actually, and we started referring to it as the Lamington, because it is just this big square chunk of bush, which they love, and they've built 5 kilometres of walkway through them, boardwalk in their spare time and stuff, and they're a really great couple. So that led to this whole series of diagrams and attempts to design the house, which picked up on this diagram in the top left, which is the narrative which gets buried into the house of the bush and the maunga. But the other thing that was really important for them was the idea of conversation. They didn't want their living room to be about television. They wanted to be somewhere they could sit and talk to each other and talk to their family who've all grown up and left but come back. And so the corridor kind of impact on the design became quite important. Lots of developments and sketchbooks of the thing in 3 dimensions and how it might work, and it went through a lot of iterations. It led to a painting, which also picked up pretty simplistically on that diagram. But they love this. The painting will end up in the house, which is quite nice. And you can see here that the house is actually quite a clear representation of the diagram. There's the corridor space, the views, and picked up the view to the mountain, picked up by the axis of the angle of these walls through here. The space opens out to really face the bush and bring the bush back into the house, and then a couple of big axes that sort of bed the house into the paddock, because it's pretty well a bare paddock otherwise. You'll notice that everything I've talked about has sort of been vehemently non-AI or computer rendered. we venture into it. We do it. This is a AI version of a SketchUp model that I made just for the hell of it, it's pretty impressive. But I do find that it keeps me too many steps removed from the process. So there's also stuff that gets in the way. You've got to know how to use this program. You've got to tell it the right things, ask it the right questions to get what you want out of it. And if you actually are aiming to get something that you want out of it, it's really, really difficult, I find. I'm really looking forward to knowing where bright young people in this room can take it for us and show us how we can use it and what can come out of it. But I want to know how we can use it to actually generate ideas and hunt down an idea rather than just look fantastic, because I find most of the images are too hyper-realistic, too boring. You can't imagine yourself in there because all the questions have been answered. There's no room for me to get into the drawing or into the idea. So I'm really looking forward to seeing where it takes us and what you can do with it for us. But the business of looking back at all this stuff, has made me think that, it would be really nice if there was this kind of relationship between the architecture and the painting and the drawings. But I suspect it's more like this. But at least, and that's what it feels like in my head most of the time. But the good thing is about all this is that there's always stuff to go back and keep working on and chase some of those elusive ideas. So what I'd like to say to the students in the room is, please, tomorrow, if you haven't already done so, go out and buy a sketchbook. Start filling it up with all sorts of nonsense. Doesn't matter. Don't evaluate it. Just do it. Have a good time. Enjoy the process, and you will love it for the rest of your lives. So thank you very much.